Hi everybody, I'm with Tyson Seburn, and we were lucky enough to kind of bump into each other at TEFL about a month and a half ago now, wasn't it?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, how was that your first visit to Brighton, or have you been before?
No, I was at the last ITFL. I was in Brighton. So it was my second conference there. But last year I was in London for my partner's 50th birthday. And we decided to take a trip to Brighton just for the day so that I could kind of check out, how it's changed and, oh, the conference is going to be there next year and so on. And so, it was my third time actually. So nothing new.
Wonderful. Well, I was really because we hadn't met before, but I had seen loads of your stuff on Instagram and stuff. Some really interesting articles and just videos and just different bits and pieces. And the reason I wanted to reach out to you is because I'm doing a unit about kind of cultural diversity and inclusiveness within ELT. So would you like to go and introduce yourself and what you do within ELT?
Sure, let's do it. My name is Tyson Seburn. Some people may know me more recently from IATFL itself. I ran for president this year, didn't win, but that might be some place you've heard my name. Other than that, I was the TD-SIG, or the Teacher Development Special Interest Group coordinator, for a long time. So did lots of events there. My day job is working at the University of Toronto. I am an academic director of an EAP Foundation program that runs during the academic year. And then in the summer, which we're just gearing up for now, I oversee more general English, youth English, pre-university stuff that's much more short than the academic year stuff. So that's sort of the sort of my day gigs. And then on top of that, I do consultations about diversity, equity, and inclusion types of work. As a gay man myself, I have quite a bit of lived experience in this regard, and even in this industry of ours, I've noticed over time a lack of diversity in that sense, particularly when it comes to teacher training or materials, especially. And I felt more and more of an obligation as I get older, quite frankly, to be a model for my students and try to make it better for other teachers.
Yeah, I think there isn't much kind of inclusion, is there, traditionally within ELT materials, textbooks, etc., for LGBTQ plus materials. And why do you think that might be?
Well, I think society has a role to play in it. So not unlike the rest of the world, ELT moves at a certain pace towards more progressive politics or more progressive outlooks on things, but it takes a long time for those things to change. And so I think in that sense, if you sort of look at society, particularly where English is spoken as a first language, our societies have progressed since, say, the 70s or the 80s in terms of queer inclusion and so on. But ELT is wrapped up with publishing and a lot of vested interests in things that take a long time to change. And so sort of like that iceberg that very, very slowly moves, I can say that we are changing as a profession, I would say, towards more inclusive practices, or certainly more awareness of that and interest, as evidenced by you wanting to talk about it even. But certainly not that much. And I think it is a lot related to sort of more conservative values that tend to dominate the publishing industry in terms of who's being sold what. And therefore, those types of values are what gets, I would say, valued the most by the publishing industry, because they want to sell the most books to the most number of people. And sadly, for one reason or another, published materials are where most of the materials for most teachers come from. So,
Yeah. Do you think it might have something to do with different, like, well, there's certainly different rates of progress. So like within the UK, within Canada, the US, the inclusion it's not perfect right now, but it's certainly way better than it was kind of 20, 30 years ago, right? And perhaps maybe out in where these textbooks are sold, you know, in different continents and stuff, maybe the rate of change isn't as fast, and so that these publishing houses kind of take a safe bet or something.
Yeah, that's certainly it. I mean, a lot of them, you know, have that parsnips rule that everybody's sort of aware of, which is, you know, to guide kind of what topics you write about and stay away from, that is sort of palatable to the lowest common denominator in terms of conservatism. But I would argue that there's a perception that students are unwilling or unfamiliar or need to be protected from certain progressive values in these places that you mentioned. And I'm not sure that that's really true. I mean, the places that I have been to talk to students or other teachers, which you would sort of put on the more conservative side of the scale in the world, open to hearing about inclusive practices, certainly in the way that I've described them in my book, for example. And there's been research done in different areas of the world, not only in the most conservative places, but even in the UK or in Germany or somewhere else. Even still, the older generation or some part of the older generation does tend to be more conservative, and they're often concerned about how their children or you know, are learning English, or what values are being told to them in school, and so on and so forth. And yet the students often report that they want to talk about these issues. They want to have themselves reflected in the materials. They want to see different role models and different aspects of reality. And I think it's just a matter of time before we get to that point where the bigger publishing houses are going to just get on board. I think it just takes one, and then eventually the other ones will follow suit, because nobody likes to be left behind.
No, absolutely. I remember teaching in China. I was teaching at university, teaching master degree students for 7 years, and I had tons of students that were gay. But there wasn't really an avenue for me to really, I mean, in my university, we didn't have any textbooks, and, you know, I just had to make my own stuff, but we were warned by kind of faculty management to stay away from particular topics. Just anything controversial was just a no-go. So, you know, it can be quite difficult for teachers, right? And to know where they can go with things. What might you have to say to teachers out there?
I think you have to gauge for yourself sort of first of all, your safety level in the context that you're living and teaching in. And, you know, obviously survival is going to trump any kind of value system, you know, that may be necessary. But I think we're kind of looking at hyperbole when we're talking about survival, you know, as a problem. Because I don't think that that's the majority of the cases we've been teaching in. And in, you know, even in my own experience, I taught in Korea in the 90s. And while I wasn't out to my employers, I did have an earring and I had a blonde streak in my hair. So I was clearly different in some way. And my employers at the time told me to take out my earring, dye my hair back to my original color. You know, the society was very conservative. Students wouldn't what's the right word? Give me credit, I guess, as a teacher, if I looked the way I did or I talked the way I did. But, you know, over time, I realized that actually wasn't true, right? And once you get to know your students, you sort of realize they're not actually the same as what you're being told they are in terms of conservatism, and they are inquisitive and they want to know more things. And, you know, sure, society can, you know, scare you a little bit. Even at the time, there were some gay celebrities who either killed themselves or their family threatened to kill themselves. You know, like, so there was that kind of thought at the same. But on the flip side, because it was so heteronormative in society, nobody really thought too much about whether there were gay people even there. So it was actually almost a haven in some ways for someone like me, because there was no suspicion whatsoever. depending on how I behave, because even boys, are much more, over falling on top of each other and affectionate and stuff like that than, the puritanical Canadian sort of perspective on how men should act around each other and so on. And then eventually I did come out to my students and they were like perfectly fine with it and super happy for me and very inquisitive, wanted to learn all about my boyfriend and, were very congratulatory, really. So I don't know necessarily that we're, a society that we consider super conservative or hyperbolically fearful is actually as bad as you think it is when you look at the ground level. So maybe teachers can probably sense that better themselves. They can sense whether or not they're going to get fired as a result of stuff, but they will know their students better than I can advise necessarily. And if you can, introduce or usualize LGBTQ people in your lessons at minimum, then go ahead and do it. It's going to be the better for everybody.
Absolutely. So what would including LGBTQ plus narratives within a classroom, how would that impact ELT?
Well, I'll start with the students themselves, right? Because I think it would, I don't think it would, that's hypothetical. I know it positively impacts the queer people in the classrooms specifically. I know this because I am one of them, but also from my own students who are queer, I do realize that when you recognize yourself in materials or you see people like you, it has a positive effect in a couple of ways. One is you feel like you belong in that situation because someone has purposely and deliberately included people like you in the learning materials, right? And if you don't see anybody like you or the experiences that you have in the materials, then at minimum, people are being told that you don't exist, right? And that's never good for your self-esteem or how you feel about yourself. A second aspect of it that is positive for queer people in particular is, especially for young people, when you see different versions of queer people doing successful things in their lives and enjoying, happy romantic relationships, or they're learning how to deal with troubles that happen just like everybody else. It gives you a sense of, direction, like there is a possible future for me. And that happens in the language classroom as much as it happens in any educational sphere, because, when I was little, the queer role models I had were usually the butt of jokes on a TV show. They were like, usually that was it. Or more recently, like in the 90s or the knots, they were side characters that were used in one episode and then killed off, or they died, or they had violence against them, and that was the storyline, right? So those types of things that you saw as a queer person, and not really the realistic version of queerness, which is in addition to that. But people like me, or people who just have their regular lives, who are doing their successful relationships or jobs or what have you. So the fact that in language education, we're all about communication and learning how to talk and learning how to communicate with each other, and being empathetic and tolerant and all this kind of stuff in a language classroom. Those are the values that we have in a language classroom. And so it makes the most sense that in this type of classroom, we would learn how to talk to queer people. We would learn how queer people talk, so we can talk like, not an alien around these people. And if you don't include these types of narratives or this type of language in your language classroom, what you're doing, apart from erasing the existence, is you're relying on someone else to teach that person how to think about queer people or how queer people, and you never know who that's going to be. That might be some ultra conservative or bigoted parent, or who really doesn't like the fact that their child is gay, and they're teaching other parents or other children, this is the way that you should act towards queer people. So why leave the hands of some other adults or some other people in society who may or may not actually have a good view? I'd rather do it in the classroom, myself as well.
Yeah, it's like, that's the amazing thing about language, isn't it? Is you can reach so many other people and cultures, and you can, you can travel around the world and meet all these people. And you make such a powerful and important point that there's so many millions and millions of gay people out there that
Mm.
when you talk to me and tell it like that, and I actually think about the TV shows where it was token characters or side storylines, and that was the reason for gay people to be in the story. It's just so it's some kind of plot rather than just normal stuff.
Yeah, and you know why that is because it's written by straight people.
Yeah,
TV show. So it's centering a heteronormative experience of what queerness is, right? And you need queer people, and not just gay, right? Trans, bisexual, pansexual, the whole gamut. We need materials writers, and if you're looking more broadly, television writers and executives and things like that from the queer community, that we can center what it is to be a queer person and don't rely on non-queer people to decide what that is.
yeah. That's really like kind of hit me for six, like thinking about that, and yeah, I think what you're doing is really great, Tyson. Actually,
Thanks.
that's such a powerful thing. Um, what should publishers do? I mean, do you think they'll just be kind of tick box changes, or do you think that they will really, in the next kind of 10 years, really change how they're publishing materials and the type of materials that are in the books?
Well, if they don't, they're going to become obsolete. That's my threat, if you want to call it that. I mean, I think that they will change. I mean, they go where the market asks them to, in a sense. And, so they're stuck on a current view of what the market decides. But I think that as I said at the beginning, the fact that we're even talking about this out loud on podcasts, or at conferences, or there are events entirely devoted to inclusive practice, how to do it these days, just shows the demand is there, right? People are willing and to learn. And it, as I have said before, it really, I think, will take just one publisher to produce one material, or sorry, one book, one course book, one teacher training course book, whatever, that is really good in terms of inclusive practices. And then the rest are just going to follow suit. And I've made this argument to the publishers whom I've talked to before. Do you want to be the first one to do it and be forever in history as the one who did it at the beginning and set the tone and the trend for everybody, or do you be the last one? Which is better? And I think while profit obviously is a driving force in these types of publications, someone's got to cut the cord and get it started, and all going to follow suit. And as I said, if they don't, the rest of us are going to do it for you, and won't buy the books that you produce anymore.
Do I'm just thinking, as like a historical document, if you were to look back on this video in 20 or 30 years time, how stark it will be that you're having to champion this fight, or not champion it, but fight this fight. This shouldn't be a fight at all, right? This is just common sense that these kind of materials should be inclusive.
Exactly. And you make an interesting analogy that in 20 years we could look back at this, right? It's 2024, right? It's not 1984.
Yeah.
And in 1984, someone made a video like this, not about ELT, but it was about the same type of deal, and thought, surely in 40 years everyone will be fine with queerness. But it didn't take every single place, and so hopefully we do look back at this and go like, oh, they undercutted. They didn't really think how quickly it was going to change. And it changed immediately right after this. In 2026, everything was fine. That's what I hope we we'll be able to say for sure.
So let's assume that some progress is made.
Hmm.
What would that progress look like ideally?
I think, first of all, we need to have a real published material by a major publisher that has been consulted by or completely written by queer people so that it's done correctly and have that as a sort of starting point. I mean, there's lots of us who are making materials one-offs, and if you kind of put those in a collection, maybe it would be something like that. But we don't have the finances or the resources behind us to produce them on a mass scale or with the polish, that you can get with full designers and so on. So I think that would be an excellent thing to have, given the fact that most people in the world do, in fact, use published materials in their classrooms. And then we need teacher training courses like CELTA, for example, or the DIP-TESOL, to actually value inclusive practices as a core part of their curriculum. So when we are learning how to teach, we have these inclusive principles in mind from the get-go, and it's not sort of thrown in half-assed here and there at different points.
Actually, the course I run TESOL courses as well. It's much smaller, obviously, compared to CELTA or DIP-TESOL. But actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to include a large section in inclusivity.
Hurrah!
Within the course, and hopefully, it's a small start. But I might have to lean on your knowledge to inform that module.
Well, that's for.
If that's okay, yeah. And I think what I'd like to do is to get this video out there to some of these publishing houses. Hopefully it hits the mark somewhere, and these kind of publishing houses kind of like wake up, really.
Yeah, that would be great. It's not like they don't know that we're talking about this stuff, right? I've had conversations with different representatives from different places, like not just one publisher, and they're all aware that we're talking about this stuff, and are at least tokenly interested. I would, for the benefit of the doubt, I would say they're more than that, but they do rely on the our hands are tied kind of thing to say. I don't work in a publishing company, so I can't quite honestly say with any authority what governments are saying to them, or what ministries are saying to them, or what they're making up themselves, or what, I'm not privy to those conversations. All I can do is show them what the benefits are of making materials that are more inclusive, and hopefully they can, eventually recognize it isn't just the conservative market that you need to value in terms of publishing books. You need to value people like me who are also learning language, and it's a threat to us not to have materials that represent us.
And grossly unfair.
Well, yeah, I mean, for sure. Hopefully anyone would say that's true.
Yeah. Tyson, thank you so much for spending the time to speak to me today. It's been absolutely fantastic.
Thanks for inviting me. It's always good. I've seen your stuff, and I'm really glad to be now part of your catalog.
Thank you, Tyson. Hopefully we can get you on again at some point. But thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Cool. You too. Have a good one.
Yeah, bye.